Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew, and tonight I want to welcome investigator, whistleblower, author, and film producer, Bob Fletcher. How you doing tonight, Bob?
I'm fine. Hanging in there, as they say, Chris.
Very good.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thank you for taking the time to join us. Now, tonight we're going to be discussing Planet X, and it's a topic that it has so much disinformation surrounding it. And over the past few years, it seems that disinformation has grown. And that's why I have you on here to get a different perspective, to find out what you've been researching on Planet X. But before we get into any of that, let's get into your background. It's a fascinating one. And what got you started on the Planet X investigation?
Okay, good. Well, yes, my background is really profuse. As a matter of fact, it was amazingly interesting and profuse long before I realized and actually discovered by chance the extraordinary amount of corruption in government. That started in about, I guess it was 1984, 85, in that period of time. And I was had nothing to do with government, had nothing to do with investigating government at that time. And I actually had a large manufacturing company in Atlanta, Georgia. We manufactured toys, and this is what makes it, I guess, really strange. I simply merged my company with a holding company that had operations in a variety of businesses all around the globe. And for me, it was just simply a financial expansion, and we were set up to start advertising on television, etc., with a terrific toy that I had invented and was manufacturing. And lo and behold, after completing the merger, I started seeing all these really strange things taking place with my new quote-unquote business partner. And the bottom line, just to kind of expedite this front end of this thing, I discovered that he was, in fact, a supplier of weapons for covert operations, working directly with the NSA, the CIA, and right out of the White House. Now, this was, bearing in mind the time frame here, this was about a year before the Iran-Contra stuff broke in the news, and of course then they had the big investigations on the Iran-Contra business. But I mean, I was overwhelmed. I started the very first part of it that started to be strange for me, obviously, was in fact that I was meeting military generals, and basically where I was with my toy manufacturing business, and this fellow, his name was Gary Best. Some of his other businesses were like a window company and a huge business that filled the 7-Eleven types convenience stores with all the miscellaneous watches, the cheap $9.95 watches and things of that sort. Now I'm talking about all over the country, and that was now a functioning business. All the businesses that he had were functioning businesses like my own, and doing whatever different things that we did. But he utilized them as a covert front for reasons to go to places. So, for example, with the watch business, which was all over the country, hundreds of thousands of watches, so it could have been a good business unto itself. But he would have, like, for example, if he went to Geneva and Switzerland, etc., he would have said he was there purchasing watches. When he went to other countries, he would say that he was doing this or doing that. And in my case, which were toys, he could go to a lot of places, including, well, any place at all almost, and say that he was looking for places to have toys manufactured, et cetera, et cetera. It's amazing to me, which I found out later, actually, once I got into pulling out of that whole crazy thing. But this is done all the time, utilizing a whole variety of private businesses And usually, quite often, and particularly with this one fella, um, they literally steal the business. He offered me, attempted to recruit myself to be a courier to go to Africa and other places where they were setting up covert operations in small wars and that type of thing, which also, again, included, of course, the Iran-Contra in Nicaragua. And he wanted me to get involved with going to Africa. They were planning to start with some new covert, internal overthrows of governments and things of that sort. And they would use regular standard business like myself, my own, as a reason to travel. I was there for a few months. Next thing I know, is military generals coming in, and I'm meeting all of these people. We're receiving phone calls from all around the world, and at the drop of a hat, this fellow, Mr. Gary Best, would be just gone. I would ask the secretary. This was a big operation. Now, even the square footage was quite large in Atlanta, and I would come into work and I'd ask, "Where's Gary?" And they say, "Oh, he's in Geneva, or he's in someplace here, there, overseas. He's in Europe, France, and he'll be back in a couple of days." And this was places where we really, from my knowledge, were not doing any standard business. The bottom line was, I confronted him at one point in time, finally, and I said, "Hey," and they were he was making more money than you could imagine, and he actually had like 5 different passports, which obviously was something amiss there. But I asked him, I said, "What are you doing? What is the primary source of income here? What's going on with the military people and all?" And he said, "We sell armament." And that was an interesting term. It wasn't arms, but armament, which again, I was to find out. He was right, because it was bigger than just weapons, hand weapons. We were talking about, he was selling entire aircrafts at a $10 million profit on like C-130 airplanes and 747, 727 aircraft, helicopters into South Africa, and that type of thing. And one point in time, just before I left, it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. He came in and threw a brochure on my desk, and it was a colored brochure. He says, "We're going to start handling these." I thought maybe he was going to try to pick up some new type of toy that we could run into my lines of what we had. And when I looked at it, it was a Hellfire missile, which of course is a missile that they've used all the time, all over the place, even off of the drones in the Mideast. They're $65,000 each. So it was rather shocking. And again, at one point in time, finally, he made me the offer to permanently come on board, and explained what he wanted myself to do. And that would be to go to specific places, make like I was purchasing some toys on the one hand, and then while I was there, either deliver messages or pick up messages, and simply be an information courier back and forth. And the downside of it, and of course, there was a lot of money involved, but the downside of it was, in fact, that he said, if you happen to talk to the wrong person when you're over there, good chance you're going to get killed.
Right.
So I kind of weighing out the negatives and the positives, I decided to quit, drop, and get out of that, even though he at that time owed me $250,000, which I never received. Now, when the Iran-Contra thing broke, now this was literally within months of the Iran-Contra business in 1987, reaching the level where it was starting to be investigated in Washington. And when that broke, I was literally watching the news, and I see where, I don't remember who it was exactly at that time, may have been Senator Kerry, I'm not sure, but he said, somebody on TV, on the news, had said, this is something about people are still going over and locating missing people, POWs that were missing from the Vietnam War. Now that was a long time after the Vietnam War, but there were still Pentagon, actually an entire division of the Pentagon set up, still looking for live prisoners. And he said that they didn't know for sure who was doing it, and it was being covertly funded, and et cetera, et cetera. Well, one of the persons doing it was Lieutenant Colonel Bo Greitz. I don't know if you know who he is, but he was actually the fellow that was the character from which the Rambo movies were made. He was the real thing, and had been carrying out major covert operations as like a Delta Force person for several years, and was even written up as being one of the greatest warriors in the Vietnam War in the history of American covert operations. And he was in the toy factory, had met him. And so I called Washington and I said, hey, I know who's doing that part of these operations, and other people that were involved. And I said, if I'll just leave this names with you. And I named 3 or 4 of the military generals. And I said, if this is important, call me back. If it's not, don't bother. Well, I got a call back the next day, and they said, going over the names that I'd given him, he said, you're right in the middle of this thing. So I ended up being this was what would have been my first involvement with being a whistleblower. And then from there, I became an investigative researcher, and then, of course, got more and more involved as the time passed by. But that was the first of it, and that was how I got into it. And again, later I had actually met several different people that had businesses exactly like mine, just regular businesses. One of them was an oil company in Texas, and this same character, Gary Best, stole $10 million in equipment from him on the same kind of a setup, where he took him in, signed contracts, merged, never paid for it completely, and then ended up stealing all this fellow's equipment, and got involved with operations as a matter of fact, in Russia, in Azerbaijan, and in Armenia. So that's how big it was. It's tied straight in to the White House, and that's what was, as I got farther into this, that's what really bothered me. The reality was that the bulk of the most outrageous criminal activities you could imagine, including drug smuggling, done out and coordinated right straight out of the White House, and that included the Bush family and Bill Clinton's family, and then the Bush families over again, and the major, unbelievable criminal acts of taking, for example, with the Iran-Contra stuff, they were shipping weapons down, flying them down on military aircraft to locations in Nicaragua and Panama with Manuel Noriega and all of those people involved with that, and they were loading up cocaine and narcotics of different sorts and flying them right back as payment for the weapons for covert operations. And it was known by the presidents that I've already mentioned.
Wow.
So,
now,
pretty amazing.
That is amazing. That's fascinating. But the subject of Planet X is a whole nother level. What actually made you, connect the dots to that? There's
right. And let me tell you how that morphed into several directions. I ended up, and now this was initiated in 85, 87, 86, in that period of time. For the next 10 years, up through 97, I became involved in doing investigative research because of all the people that I had met, and they were a reasonably small number. In other words, they constantly used many of the same people in different operations that were secret and covert, etc. And I had done work for actually probably seven or eight major investigations at the congressional and Senate level. And I would have, my name was banging around Washington, D.C. as a guy that if they got some senator or some congressman or a congressional investigation or a Senate investigation, if something came up, they would say, hey, give Fletcher a call, touch base with this guy, and find out if he has anything in his files and records, etc., that would connect A and B or C and D with this. And the way I got into, which, by the way, I would not normally have done anything at all with Planet X or the Nibiru thing. It's just something that would never have been on my radar screen. But what happened was someone or two people called and said, Bob, we're discovering money, huge amounts of money, vanishing from specific accounts in government, and it's just disappearing. And we can't, I mean, it's, you know, really big bucks. Now, I had chased on the behalf of 2 or 3 investigations, I had tracked down multi-millions of dollars that had been stolen in some cases. Where's a senator or congressman and built him a nice place in the Virgin Islands by ripping off some money out of one account or another account. And those were quite often, it was millions or multi-millions of dollars, but not really, not billions. And also you have to realize, and then, by the way, the number went up to trillions, okay? And the idea of anybody stealing that much, siphoning that much money off over a period of, let's say, a year or two or a couple of years out of like the defense budget, you can't, you got to get a handle on this. You can't money launder $1 trillion. You know, the dope people that these guys were involved with, smuggling the dope in, etc. They're used to, and pretty easy to wash out 10, 15, 20 million dollars and money launder it. But when somebody says that there was $1 trillion missing out of the defense budget at the Pentagon, which was Donald Rumsfeld had actually gone before the Congress in another investigation and said he can't find $2.3 trillion from the budget in the Defense Department at the Pentagon, and it was over a period of, he's only talking maybe a time period of 3 to 5 years. Well, he's talking about trillions with a T. Right. So that was what I started looking into, and by this time now I was pretty well educated. You know, we're talking a difference of from the time I got first involved with these bums out of Washington and looking into them. This was like 10 years, and I had done an awful lot by that time. But I was stymied. I said, "Where in God's name?" So what I started putting out feelers around to different people, and I ended up befriending people in all of the agencies. These were hopefully, in most cases, they were good guys, you know, that were legitimate and not the bad guys. But I'm talking about the FBI, the ATF, people at the Pentagon, Central Intelligence persons that would talk, et cetera, and senators, congressmen, governors all over the country. And so a couple of people asked me, they said, because I was just asking people, where the heck what would you do with $1 trillion, you know, or whatever, $60 billion, that kind of money? Where would anything like that happen? What's going on? And somebody said to me, how about the underground facilities? And I was already aware that we had some of these underground facilities. And as a matter of fact, in the United States, as of a couple of years ago, there literally was, and there may be more now, 103 underground facilities in the United States of America. For the most part, some of the money is black covert money out in front, but that other huge amount of money that had been disappearing, just vanishing, was going into the construction of these underground facilities. And again, like I say, there's 103 of them. Now I'm talking about facilities with entire highway systems underground that accommodate an 18-wheel, 40-foot trucks and intersections with them passing each other and going from state to state underground. And I had earlier, before I had started looking into this specifically, I had some people, probably I'm talking now, let's see, it would have been about 5 years or earlier. I had some guys send me some videos that were truck drivers and said that they had been scheduled to make deliveries, and they would go out in the middle of the desert for the designation, and the side of a mountain would open up. It sounded like, you know, it really sounded like crazy Mickey Mouse motion picture science fiction stuff. But they would be flagged in to the side of a mountain that would literally open up out in the desert. They would drive inside. The thing would close up behind them, totally camouflaged, and they would go down and they would be given instructions and special papers, etc., and make deliveries of an unbelievable variety of things. But the bulk of which, or many of it was, many parts of it was survival foods by the truckload that had been ordered by FEMA, and you know, X numbers of tons of stuff to go down into these facilities. So that was where the money went. And by the way, I must add also, besides the underground regular roadways under the ground, they had magnetic levitated trains to go from state to state, where a person would just get into the trains, like the ones that they utilize above ground all over Europe, as a matter of fact. They go 400 miles an hour. You get on the train, they close it up, zoom, you just go. There's nothing, there are no crossroads or anything, so there's nothing going to hit it. And they go from one state to another in only a couple of minutes. And these were profusely all over the United States, linking different parts of these underground facilities. So it was not a big shock to me, because I had heard about them and had actually received photographs and some videotapes. Later on, when I got into doing the Nibiru thing, which is related to this, when I got into looking into that, I ended up getting a whole bunch of, so I actually have live videos and photographs and what have you, which is on the DVD as one part of on the DVD that I did, which is called Incoming, which I put out a couple of years ago that we were referring to, my part of the investigations. So what happened was, so now I understand, okay, now you can bury hundreds of billions or $1 trillion in these kinds of facilities, because some of them, believe it or not, and I believe we've got pictures of them included in my DVD Incoming, that actually some of them are 35 stories down into the ground. And they're amazing. They're big enough to handle a large number of people, and the facility inside, all of these are completely set up to be self-sustaining for a long period of time. A certain given number, they're all a little bit different in terms of size. So and I have I have the FEMA request for the food and all that. I have all of that is in the study that I did and put on the DVD that's called Incoming. Now, what I discovered when I got into it, I still didn't know. I still didn't know about Planet X, and you know, I didn't have great knowledge of that at all. But now I started saying, and putting feelers out to other people out there that knew more about these things than I did. And I found out that every major nation, like Europe, let's say London, and in China, and in Russia, all of these major countries had the same kind of programs where they were building these underground facilities. Some of them actually in Russia and China are much bigger than the ones that we have. But the big point is, in Russia and China, many of these were publicly known. In other words, that the government was building these underground hideouts for a calamity of any sort that might strike Earth. And that's the reason. So some of them were known by the regular public in some of the other countries. In the United States, for a multitude of reasons, they opted to keep the underground operations really underground, and have not made much public on the underground facilities. But they were giant. The ones in Russia are giant. The ones in Red China are giant. The ones in England are a little bit smaller. But and so it was a worldwide thing. So now here I'm still trying to answer the question of, what is it that everybody is mutually worried about? And then again, it was somebody in the know on the inside said, because I was talking to people about it, and somebody said, well, it's probably connected to the Ronald Reagan in 1983, the Star Wars program. It's got something to do with that. And they just said, gave me a hint and the people to talk to, and said, why don't you check this out? So, see, in 1983, Ronald Reagan, with George Bush as his vice president, although for the most part, Bush from day one in 1980, when they stole the presidency away from Jimmy Carter, the country was pretty much being presidentially run by George Bush, with Ronald Reagan strictly as the spokesperson, so to speak. And in some things, like and again, these were the guys that were involved with the Iran-Contra stuff, with the drugs coming in, while at the same time they were, Ronald Reagan's wife was saying, just say no, and the children are, the children have a problem with the drugs, when in fact we were bringing them in on military aircraft and even offloading them on military bases, with CIA on the side of the craft or on the paperwork, and nobody at the military base was allowed to even see what was being offloaded of some of these C-130 cargo craft that were flying in tons of cocaine and heroin, and opiates, etc., into our own air bases, which is rather upsetting. But to get back to the Nibiru thing, so in '83, apparently, from the information that I received, Ronald Reagan was notified by probably one of the divisions of NASA, where they had put out one of their bigger, newer telescopes and telescopic satellites, so to speak, and had put them out, and some of them with the capability to read infrared, because Nibiru is, in fact, an infrared, from our visual thing, it's an infrared planet, and with about 4 or 5 of its own moons, etc. Well, what had happened was they started creating this thing called Star Wars, the Star Wars Initiative, which was supposedly the ability to take lasers and beam weapons of different sorts and be able to track instantly if Russia launched 15 or 20 nuclear weapons or something like that, or someone like that, for example, even North Korea, that the Star Wars laser beam setup that they had been creating had the ability to locate the launching of a weapon like that very quickly, and with lasers or microwave weapons, take down and destroy a multitude, 1 or 2 of these computerized systems that they were creating could take down the incoming of a variety of missiles being launched towards America instantaneously, with literally the capability to retarget and hit in like just a couple of seconds. It could make boom, hit one with a laser, relocate, computerized, find the GPS the GPS figures on it and shoot down number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. And that's what they had told us anyhow, that was what it was for. But then I found out later that most of those were pointed outward, and most of the tracking satellites were pointed outward to outer space, and not all actually watching Red China or Russia for potential incoming missiles. They were watching incoming near-Earth objects that may be coming in, because in 1983, one of the satellites apparently picked up and the people came to the President Reagan, and said, remember that thing that people talked about for 50 years and was kind of a conversation, and nobody knew for sure, that thing that was called Planet X or Nibiru? Well, we found it, and it looks like it's real, and we've got to now be concerned with that as a possible incoming problem. And so that was it. Bingo. So then I got, from that point forward, I got looking into the rest of the story, as they say. And I know you've had Gil Brouchard on your show, I believe.
Yes, yes, I have.
Yeah, and Gil's stuff was great and is great from his investigative research that he had done, that went back in the biblical terms, because it is defined in biblical scriptures. And of course, back in the Chinese emperor, they used to have back in the old days, they had I was talking maybe 1,000 years ago or whatever, the Chinese emperor's own I'm not sure what they would call them there, but they're astronomers, I guess, that actually came to the emperor of China and had reported and defined very clearly when this had passed through before. There were actually records of that. There are records on relative to like out in the Himalayan monks. They had records of this thing happening, passing by. And then, of course, the obvious thing in the Bible is the floods of Noah, where the seas just rose up and obliterated, became the famous Noah Ark and all of that. That potentially was more likely than not the passing of Nibiru passing by. Nibiru is estimated to be 5 times the size of Earth in terms of diameter and mass. And the story had always been, which is again cross-referenced by great stuff by Gil, and then several other people have been involved with it, that it was on this huge, like a 3,000 year orbital trip. So it would take 1,500 years, so to speak, to come in, go around the sun, and then back out another 1,500. And of course, when I first got into hearing these figures in reference to just Nibiru or Planet X, I thought, and not being an astronomer, but being highly skilled and informed in an awful lot of knowledge in an awful lot of arenas. But I was thinking, well, that's really amazing, because we have like the comet that comes around, Halley's Comet, every 75 years. Well, 75 years is one thing, but talking about coming in 1,500 years and then back out 1,500 years, that's a heck of a big circle. And I was a little skeptical about the possibility of that. But there just literally was so much documentation that this is a real entity. It is a real planet, and it does, because of all of the stories, literally, that are documented. I mean, you can even, it may be rough documentation, but it's been the story of this thing coming in that people didn't even know what it was. This mystical thing would appear in the sky, and it would look like a star, and that usually almost all of the reports now follow the same, and that is it would be seen in the way up in the sky, and it would appear like a star, and it would be in the period of time of December on almost all of the occurrences, even the ones going back a thousand years or whatever. So it would be seen as a star. It would just get bigger and bigger, and coming into through our solar system, and then around the sun, and then back on out. And with the Earth traveling around the sun itself, it would mean that when this thing would come in, dragging millions of miles of space junk with it, trash, besides the 4 or 5 moons that it is reported to have with it, traveling in its own orbital structure. When it would come in, it would be dragging millions of miles of garbage, with space junk, and like exactly similar to Halley's Comet. And when Halley's Comet comes in, which of course that's just like a big ball of ice, so to speak. And so the tail of that thing, which is about 4 million miles long or something like that, but that's just pieces of ice, and it has no reference to being a problem for Earth. But Nibiru, Planet X, the size of it and its gravitational effects, for one thing, if nothing else, the gravitational effects is where we get into the yanking coming around, passes by the Earth, or excuse me, let me put it this way. It comes down in and around the sun. It comes in, let's say, on the left side, out the right side. All right. Now, this takes a few days, and what happens is the Earth going around on a regular circle around the Earth, around the sun, the Earth going around the sun, it would go through this tail of junk 2 times. So it's not going to strike the Earth. It has never struck the Earth. But what it does is the gravitational effect screws up everything, of course, obviously, because of the mass and the size and the gravitational effect. We understand that the moon, which is way the heck out there, has the effect on our tides on a daily basis. That's the gravitational effect that does the movement of the tides. When we have something like this thing that's 5 times the size of Earth, swooping down and around and then back out, the gravitational effect, for one thing, it drags and pulls the oceans out of the seabeds and flips it right on like a giant tsunami, like we've seen in the last couple of years, a couple of tsunamis from earthquakes under the ocean. These tsunamis, of course, in this case, would be that 150, 200 feet height of water coming in around the coastlines. Now, the big question is, several questions are, where would it come from? What direction is it going to come, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, well, and by the way, let me move back just a little bit. When this first seen in December, which again, most all of the reports have been going back to the scriptures and all the rest of that, when it's first seen in December and it approaches, all right, it goes December, January, February, March, and then in the March to April point in time is when it would then be swooping around and causing us problems. So it would take that period of time from when people first start seeing it in the sky and saying, wow, there's a new star. What the heck is it doing and where is it going? That would be in December, give or take, whatever. And then the period of time to get to March and April for it to come close and then head back out. Because we go around the sun on a regular basis, we would go through the tail one time, and then it would go, Nibiru would go head back out again. We would go through the tail a second time. And during those 2 periods of time would be, which has been all mathematically, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, all mathematically analyzed and down to a specific how long it would be that we would pass through pass through one side and then pass through the second side, crashing through all this junk. Now that's going to be a secondary beyond the potential of the gravitational effect on the oceans and the flooding. It would be a secondary problem. It's going to be banging through 2 times through the tail of space junk and garbage. That would be the equivalent of a tremendous meteor storm twice hitting the Earth. And of course, it's a matter of what direction or what side it hits through and all of that as to the damage. But of course, all of that would set fires and all that type of thing. So it would be pretty holocaustic. There
definitely would. And all the stuff you're saying, there are things occurring right now that would support evidence of an intruder in our solar system, like the magnetic north moving that they're actually talking about on the mainstream news, and recent fire.
Very much. Yeah, very much. What's happening to and I'll tell you, I've for about 3 years I've stepped away from the spotlight. I haven't done a lot. I was doing a tremendous amount of interview radios, and before I was radically injured a few years back, I was on the road doing a tremendous amount of personal appearances all over the country, and in talking about a variety of things, not just this. This has not been not been a primary interest of mine. I had this whole multitude of things, including the murder of Sonny Bono, that they palmed off on us as running into a tree. I have an entire DVD on that as well, on that investigation. Sonny was in fact murdered, and that's a separate thing, and I'll mention a little bit about it in a few minutes later on, because I was directly involved with, unfortunately, material information that I had passed on. I had worked about 7 or 8 months supplying Sonny with documentation on a multitude of criminal activities, including drug smuggling and murder and weapons and things of that sort, and assassinations. I had supplied him with an amazing amount of documentation, and he was let me put it this way. I had supplied him with this, had worked with him for about 7 or 8 months. He had finally put together what he needed to do a major expose of the criminal activities I'm referring to, and they had finally called me just before the Christmas holidays, and they called me and they said, Bob, and I was in California at that time. I had been in and out of Washington for a long, long time, but at this time I was living in California, in Los Angeles. They called me and said, you got to plan to get in right after the Christmas holidays, because we're ready now, and we have subpoena powers. We're going to open a full investigation into your material and a few other people, material that I had actually supplied Sonny, and irrefutable documentation is what he got from me, and that was just before Christmas, and they said we'll get back to you, but Sonny's going to be back about 15 days after Christmas. He's going skiing, and when he gets back, we're going to open up the investigations. So they were just giving me a heads up and telling me to get ready to make the trip back into Washington to assist in the actual inquiry that they were going to launch. It's going to be a big one. It was really devastating, and the bottom line was the fellow that had been his administrative director out of his offices called me, said, so be ready to come in, get tickets. I'll let you know when you need to be here and come on in. And the investigation will take place as soon as Sonny comes back from the ski trip. And couple days later, he was murdered on the ski slopes and dragged up against a tree and reported as running into the tree. I have a complete DVD that's available on that murder and all the rest of the information on it. That's a sidebar. But let me get back to this. Anyhow, unfortunately, he was murdered to prevent that hearing from taking place. End of story. And it's pretty upsetting for me personally. But he's the only guy that had the guts to even do it. He had been freaked out when he had seen stuff and found out what was going on out of Washington, and he couldn't handle it, so he chased the worst of it, and he got the worst of it. They killed him. He was murdered.
Wow.
So anyhow, where was I? We were talking about
the magnetic field moving, how they're openly talking about this, and an increase in fireballs as well.
Sure. Well, actually, and there's it's been a little bit of mention of this thing, but not very much relative to the movement, and it's difficult to answer any degree of accuracy, mostly because we don't know exactly when Nibiru will be close enough to affect the Earth, and we had a problem with everybody that got into the studying of the Nibiru thing. The DVD incoming that I did covers just about every facet of it. But the problem was, or that came up, when you're trying to figure out an arrival date or a time, or even the direction it might be coming at, et cetera, because it may actually be coming down from outer space down into our solar system, and then coming around the sun and then going back out, as opposed to being on the plane of the ecliptic. Okay, but so that's one question about the direction where people think they may want to look and see it, and all the rest of that. But the problem is with trying to define the date. What happened with that I discovered later on, as a matter of fact, after I had actually put out the DVD on incoming, was that, and it's a simple little thing, but it screws everybody's best analysis in terms of time of arrival, and that is that in a period of time over 2,000, 3,000 years, which is going back a lot farther than media, that's for sure. But the problem was that there was a misunderstanding in interpreting the numbers of zeros. In other words, they didn't use a zero for a long period of time. They were using like the Roman numerals even, or that kind of a concept. And there was a misinterpretation in terms of, were we talking 350 years, for example, in terms of the orbital cycle, or were we talking by a simple one more digit zero in some kind of interpretation? We would have it would show up incorrectly. So it would go from instantly goes from 350 to 3,500. So then right away it threw all the calculations of people. They say, oh, this was written into this Chinese scripture, or this was written here, it was there, or whatever. And that little thing relative to when everybody agreed to like use the same digit to indicate numerical digiting, in other words, 350, 3,500, 3,500, etc. So it kind of threw a real monkey wrench into trying to figure out exactly when it would arrive. So that's been a big problem. Now, I had specifically pointed out a couple of years ago, there's an awful lot of strange things going on relative to, for example, weather, and even the external, the the external application or the problems with the planets themselves. They're all changing, even including their orbits. Some of them are creating new, actually, some that didn't even have atmospheres are creating atmospheres in the last few years, etc. But as far as the magnetic movement of north, it is a real thing. That's one of the reasons why some of the media has gotten on board with that, and it's moving rapidly. And there's previously, it has not been scientifically, obviously because it goes back so far, there's not been a lot of scientific studies as to like what would happen if there was a switch, which is what the concern is now. Because of the radical movement, there's a concern about switching of the North and South poles altogether magnetically. It's already moved so crazy, so radically in only the last few years that there is a serious scientific concern relative to that. It's happened. They do know it has literally flipped in the past, but the time on that is almost like, actually, it's worse than Nibiru. It's like 300,000 years ago was the last one that they think took place. And the best manner by which they are able to even study that is the magnetism percentages in rocks, ancient rocks, and the location of the rocks and similar magnetism in locations in other places on the globe. So this part of it related to the flipping, they're stuck with not being able to say that it might happen here, it might happen there, but with us physically watching it right now and being able to keep track of in a formal electronic manner, keep track of the movement of it right now. They are really worried about it, and that's only one of a multitude of serious problems. Again, they're saying we may be as much as 300,000 to 500,000 years overdue for a complete reversal of the North and South Pole. But because it was so long ago, the last one that really took place on Earth, we have no idea what will happen if, in fact, what type of effects it would have.
It's definitely very concerning. I mean, the fact that it has moved so much just in the past few years. They have to be concerned about it. And the elite.
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, to show you that it is a real concern, as in serious, they've actually gone to several airports and had to move and totally adjust the GPS signals, et cetera, because it obviously affects that. The GPS signals all originate or come from a given position of the magnetic the magnetic signals relative to North and South Pole. So they say North Pole is right here at this latitude and this longitude, but now it's 40, 50, 60 miles over, and now it's farther over here and moving really quickly. But the airports in several of the northern parts of the hemisphere have actually changed runways and changed markers because aircraft were coming in and they were, a couple miles off. And so it is that much of a serious concern right now. But in terms of what will happen, the dynamics of the Earth, what really will take place, they don't have any historic manner to really say. In other words, would it be like instantly frozen in one place and not frozen in another? And was this, in fact, what took place when they found the mammoths frozen solid into the south of the North Pole with tropical fruit in their mouths? All right, and that happened, of course, several years ago. Was a discovery.
Yeah.
But that was a point when everybody said this must have been a flipping of the Earth, almost instantaneously, so that they were in the jungle type of of an environment, and when it flipped, it instantly froze them standing there with tropical fruits in their mouths and stomach. So it's the only way that could have happened.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now,
Now,
that being said, the elites, that's most likely why they have the underground facilities, because they are preparing and have been preparing for the eventual possible pole shift.
well, that's part of it. But see, there's an awful lot other things going on. The entire and part of what I mentioned, I think I mentioned it to you earlier, was um, and before we were on the air, is related to the fact that we have this gigantic storm literally today when we're doing this particular interview, that is the biggest storm in the history of India, being struck while we speak. Actually, it took place a little bit earlier today, but it with permanent winds of not just gusts, but winds of 190 to 200 miles an hour. And
Yeah.
of course, most of the homes over in that particular area are thatched roofs and that type of thing. So it just totally destroying certain parts of India. But that's only one of an unbelievable multitude of, we'll say, earth changes, and it's got nothing to do, obviously, all these the extreme wacko left from a political scene trying to tell us that because too many cows are passing gas, this type of a change and what's going on around the globe is way past that. And another thing, trying to talk about when this changing of the flipping of north and south may have taken place. Yellowstone is also another situation, because 2.5 years ago, when the Yellowstone had its huge explosion, right now it would indicate, going by the cycle of what's going on in Yellowstone with that potential of the huge volcanic activity, we may be behind schedule on that as well. We could be as far as 200,000 years or whatever the heck it is out of sequence, or let me say over past due, to have a volcanic activity, the real big one, at Yellowstone. And what they just discovered about 2 years ago, that this cauldron that everybody worried about blowing, when it blows, when it's really the big one at Yellowstone, that would travel eastward and it would just completely cover the entire United States, would be like a blacking it out for some unknown period of time, and kill off vegetation and everything just by blocking the sun. They just discovered a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, whatever it was, that cauldron is like 30 times larger than we were worried about. And the one that they've been worried about is fairly close to the surface. But if you go down a little bit farther, with the new equipment they've had developed recently, they found the cauldron that literally is 35 times larger than the one that we were worried about covering the entire globe. So that's kind of freaky. And the numbers of volcanic activity is tremendously increased. And we have like
yeah, I was looking
ongoing.
at that today.
Yeah,
We
have
like 68 volcanoes either erupting or on alert right now.
yes, and a year ago, see, I've been working on a brand new expose that's turned into a huge project. I've been working on it for like 2 years, and what happened was I was led down. The doors kept flipping open for me, where instead of it being a simple report covering a few major things that are being kept secret, really big things, it turned into a multitude. And hopefully I can get this thing finished pretty quick now, because it's going to end up being very large. It's going to be multiple discs. It'll actually be a library of government secrets, if you will. And I have things that I just don't even want to talk about right now that I've discovered, and they're mind-boggling. But additionally, talking about whether the elites expect this to take place, they are anticipating a potential problem. And between 1987 and 97, which was the first 10 years when I got involved with this, actually about 87, and then between that time and 97, there have been very serious investigators relative to criminality of the highest levels of America, and I became very close during that period of time, which is like 20 years ago. After that first 10 years of my exposure, I got to be close and actually did reports for Secretary of State John Kerry before he was Secretary of State, when he was investigating the connection of the narcotics to the CIA and major persons in the Congress and Senate. But I got close with senators and congressmen, FBI directors, Special Prosecutor Walsh during the Iran-Contra stuff, and the Pentagon investors, military officers, and all of that, and even some people that were admitted hitmen for the NSA and the CIA actually became friends. It's a little strange. I would be doing speaking engagements alongside of some of these personalities. I've had one guy that admitted to who he had killed and how he had carried it out, and for whom he was working. And to him, it was just his job. He was functioning like a military soldier working under an officer. But in fact, he was a private hitman, if you will. And by utilizing or having made friends with all these people, over the years, I've been able to really uncover an unbelievable amount of secrecy within the government and things that people have no idea that even existed. One thing of great concern right now on the Earth in general, getting back to some of that, is that the near-Earth objects like Nibiru or Planet X is of course a high concern. But another one is the holes in the sun, which they don't totally understand what's going on with that. And just like the crazy weather that's gotten bigger and worse and more crazy and convoluted, they're worried about solar flares, even including Janet Napolitano when she left as a Homeland Security head a couple of years ago. The first thing she said when part of her press conference when she was dropping out or retiring, whichever, was the fact that she thought that solar flares were probably going to be taking place in a very short time. And, without getting into the whole thing with those, the bottom line is, with the weakening protection we have around the globe with our magnetic shield that's there all the time, it's what tends to deflect solar flare activity. With 2 or 3 holes in that at this present time, she said that it was a real high likelihood that we would get hit by solar flare. Now, the ramifications of solar flares are really mind-boggling, because what happens with one good flare, the energy of one flare coming through an opening or a weak spot in our magnetic shield around the Earth, let's just say, for example, it hit right dead on into the Western Hemisphere, or our part of the United States part. The first thing that happens is all satellites are terminated, completely fried, while this thing is just on its way in. That would be the first thing it would hit. It would terminate all of the the satellites, whether they're weapons satellites, whether it's space stations with people in it, which would be non-relevant at that time anyhow. But what happens there is, just taking that part of it, we instantly have no more money. The bank money is all computer transferred via satellites. That would be gone. All your money, whatever it is, you could never prove it again. It would be just wiped out. There'd be no communications from any place at all to do any transfers. But then as it proceeded in and hit the Earth, just a single flare of serious amount of energy burns and totally destroys every single thing that's electronic. And it's mind-boggling if you just have as an average citizen, this is something we don't even think about. But when you do realize that what we're talking about now is no power of any sort, no communications, nothing. Every single thing in every home and every city and every state production of generated electrical power, et cetera, even the giant generators at the biggest Hoover Dam, for crying out loud, would be burned up and gone, would not be operative. And the projection in terms of getting everything repaired again, we would have no manner by even to ship things. There would be no communications, no tooling or equipment in manufacturing plants capable to build generators to replace the ones that were burned. And it would be devastating. Now, the possibility does exist that you could have let's say a solar flare hit all the way around the globe, or halfway around the globe, or just on us, or just on Russia, or just on China, or whichever, wherever it hits, it will just totally wipe out every single thing. And you can't, from an electric point of view, you can't even imagine that. You got to think about it. But it's we wouldn't be able to repair anything. Now, whether this type of a hit would affect things that were not hooked into the electrical system, in other words, generators that might be sitting in a warehouse, may, if it's not really hooked up, and it's a repair unit that's laying there for emergencies to replace another one, I don't know for sure if they would also be affected, and probably not. But anything at all that's presently into the electrical system, when it hits, would be off, and it would be off forever. We're talking about just jam shut, end of story. And that's something that, like I said, even Napolitano, when she left the Homeland Security, which is the worst thing that's ever happened to America, but when she left, that was a primary thing on the top of her list. But we have other things, and by the way, this all heads into something really spooky that I'm going to tell folks about, a reality that I have perceived is the situation that we are facing. I want to tell you another little serious event that's taking place right now, and that is they have discovered that the male reproductive organs of males within the industrialized nations in a 40-year period of time is now completely gone in 52% of the males of all of the industrialized modern world. And it is continuing to get worse. So we're talking the modern world and, the United States and then the main parts of Europe and et cetera. They are reducing the sperm, the capability to reproduce mankind has already reduced 52% in 40 years. Now, if it keeps going at this rate, we will not be able to reproduce mankind on Earth. And what they have traced this to, and this is real stuff, this is from totally a scientific truism. What they've traced it through is apparently there are specific plastics and content in plastics that are utilized for all of the food wrapping and packaging and shipping and containers throughout the modern industrialized world. And the problem has been directly related also to the same chemical content in this plastic coatings and wrappings, etc., is actually the same coating that they use on all pharmaceuticals. You know, this little light, when you take a medication, whatever it is, this little plastic thing that it's in, that whether you're talking about a little capsule or even a slight coating on the outside of all of these trillions of pharmaceuticals that, again, the modern world, the modernized areas of Earth are all coated with this, and it wipes out the sperm count on the man.
Now, there are theories that this is being done intentionally.
Well, I don't know. That's hard. That's always possible. But the bottom line is, it can't be stopped or reversed at this time. It's entirely too far going. End of story in terms of completion. So in a few years, again, and I'm using the right terminology, and that is, they discovered this in the modern world. So obviously, in places in Africa and other places may not, that are not so profusely utilizing these plastic coated products and consuming them. They don't have the problem. So I don't know if we're talking about them doing it intentionally. That they're doing is destroying the educated, generally the higher educated humans on Earth, and they would no longer be able to reproduce. Now,
sure, it wouldn't be a problem for them.
Well, I mean, the people are just going to be gone. It's just, you can't have babies, and that next group, there's not going to be anybody else to be worried about in a couple of generations. And again, the percentage is unbelievable. It's 59% or 60% vanished sperm count in just the last 40 years. So in another 20 years, there'll be no reproduction of educated mankind on the face of the earth. All right, and that's, I mean, these are things that are like, holy mackerel. It's devastating, and it's beyond the point of being able to reverse it. There's other things that they're claiming they don't understand what's causing it. For example, it's very much a reality that the entire glaciers of North and South Pole are melting every day. Thousands of cubic feet of water being entered into the ocean by the melting of the glaciers, and it's not a small amount. It's horrendous, and it's a daily thing. It's not like, oh well, it's a seasonal thing and it does a little bit here and a little there. And they're finding, or the implication is, what's happening is that it's melting from underneath. In other words, it's not necessarily an external changing above ground, that these glaciers are being melted as if the interior was getting hotter inside the globe, or some other, like a microwavable type situation, causing the underground, so to speak, to melt these glaciers from the inside out. But it's melting now. The glaciers are melting, and they have been doing this now for about 3 years, which, by the way, these things I put into the Nibiru DVD that I put out was already happening. Likewise, the changes to the planetary system I mentioned a few minutes ago. with changing atmosphere and all of that, and wiggling out there in their and heating up more than the changing temperatures on the planets and all of that. That started about 3-4 years ago. But this there's another problem that fits into this that they're not understanding or figuring out yet. These huge cracks showing up on the surface of the crust of the Earth in a lot of places, Mexico, Texas, that kind of thing. You know, where all of a sudden they
I've
crack.
covered those.
Excuse me?
Covered those. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, but what's happening in Africa, the entire, if you try to visualize Africa in general, if we can, just because we've seen it so many times, even if you've not lived there or anything. But in Africa, the entire, like 40% of what would constitute the northeastern side of Africa is completely splitting away from the rest of the continent.
Right.
And again, these are things people, you know, now that they hear about it, they can look it up. But to the extent that in a short period of time, it's going to be totally split off and be some kind of a new name, sub-African thing, and they'll have to change the globes and the maps of the world, indicating that this huge section has split off. And again, these cracks are taking place like crazy around the globe on the you know, the surface of the crust, actually, the crust of the Earth. So whatever, that's it's. And what I have totally come to the conclusion is what's happening here is this multitude of changes globally. And by the way, before I finish where I'm going with that, the part of that glacier melting, this is the big deal. With that glacier melting, what's happening, and again, nobody's reported this in any, I suppose it has been reported, but certainly not enough so that everybody knows about it.
Right.
This water is being introduced. It is fresh water, obviously. It's like an ice cube in the refrigerator breaking off from when the glacier's melting, dropping into the ocean. What's going on is a couple of things. One is it actually raising the level of the ocean. All right. So any coastal areas obviously be the first to see the effects. Now, I used to live in Miami, and I have a son that lives down there still in the recording business, like I used to be in the recording business. But he's down in Florida, in Miami Beach area. And going back about 4 years, when this glacier melting started happening, it was recognized every high tide in Miami Beach was starting now to flood, go into Miami Beach like 4 blocks into the city. Now, if you've ever been to Miami or you're familiar with the coastline, like in California, the hotels and all of that fancy stuff is right there. And now the high tide, under a regular high tide, because of the increase in the water introduced to the ocean from these glaciers in both north and south, has raised it to Miami's ocean tide so high that it goes several blocks into the city. And they had to place about 2 years ago, so this is not like last week, but 2 years ago, they had actually installed 400 large giant pumps to pump the water on high tide out of an area that normally was regular Miami Beach hotel fronts, and so that they wouldn't flood on every high tide. So that's how it's already physically affected. And I don't know, that was actually a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, when the first pumps were put in. I think they spent $40 million or something like that, a huge amount. You know, how many pumps does it take, and how big do they have to be? But that was actually a few years ago. What's going on down there as of this afternoon, I don't know, but it certainly hasn't diminished. But the big deal with the glacier melts. And again, has not done this kind of a melt in 2,000 years. What is also happening is done one of the big radical problems that we will be confronted with for the next, this is my prediction. Of course, there's not going to be anybody around for this, but the weather is never going to be back to what we called regular seasonal weather. It is not going to be back for 1,000 years because the water is going to continue to melt the glaciers. What it's doing by entering fresh water into the solidity of salt water, which is all the major oceans, obviously, it's now causing a situation where tropical type storms or unusual storms will be beginning on both the east and the west coast on the United States, and of course around the globe too, but we're just talking about the States. The solidity content will change, and it is already making the water completely altered, and the warm water will be now in different flows around the east and the west coast, and we will have hurricane type storms and huge storms like the one in India today that we're talking about, like the crazy snowstorm blizzards of a couple of weeks ago in the middle of the country. And additionally, of course, all of these hurricanes and tornadoes and things, multiple tornadoes, big tornadoes, every single, in the last 3 years, from the time when I first put out the Nibiru heads up, the incoming DVD on Nibiru, and I covered a lot of this back at that time. And for example, storms that they've never had in certain areas before, flooding, of course, and that just goes with it, like we've never had before. Every single week for the last 2 years, going back about two, you can go back even a little farther actually, but at least 2 years, every week has been global weather-breaking weather around the globe. Yeah. Every single week for the last 2 to 3 years. And it's directly related, number one, to the change in temperature and salinity, the salt content in the oceans being watered down, changes all of the undercurrent flows, the fishes, and all of those situations. We haven't seen much news about that. A couple of years ago, it was a big thing about 10,000 fish float up dead, and 50 of these giant whales, and this, that, and everything. That's all related to this salt and temperature content and the stirring up of the ocean beds. They had one area, I don't remember where it was, just 6, 8 months ago or a year ago, where they had some outrageous, strange thing. It was like 10,000 starfish washed up on one.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. See, now they're not making a big. Nobody's telling the public this stuff. The idea from the elite point of view, those people that do have their finger on the pulse of what the hell is going on, they can't tell you. And they can't tell, if they let everybody know, if you really looked at all this stuff, the whole globe, of course, the whole globe can't even read, but that, and of course, the America's getting to where our kids can't read either, so I don't know, that's not a good comparison. But the point is that if the people knew, they would really start freaking out. We've got a lot of non-reversible, radical problems on the globe. Now, what's happened, the elite realized two things. They started, like we said, a long time ago when they put whatever, 130 of these underground facilities just here in America. They may have many more. I don't know. I'm not sure about that because I've been working on other things for 2 years now. But the point is, and this is absolutely a reality, what I'm about to say. We are going to Mars out of necessity. We are going to Mars out of necessity to send at least, and the plan is to move 1 million human beings to Mars at 100 at a time. And as a matter of fact, unfortunately, it was only yesterday, SpaceX, which has an awful lot, almost the lead on this part of the project of getting people to Mars. But this trip that they're scheduled to go to Mars, as a matter of fact, the first, now, and then I'm going to have to make sure I put an addendum to what I'm about to say. Theoretically, December of this year, where they're supposed to make the first movement, serious movement, putting some people on Mars. Okay, now, the addendum is this. I'm not sure, since they keep us in the dark approximately in 20-year cycles. So when they say something about that we're starting to do this, or we're looking into, we're going to try to now do this, or we have this new weapon, we have this new spacecraft, we have this idea of going to Mars, or we have this and we have that. I have found out, and it's almost exactly to the date, so to speak, that's when they tell us that, they've already been doing it for 20 years. And that sounds almost amazing, but it is. It's a reality. In other words, any of the major new, let's say, space explorations, whatever they're talking about, planning this and planning that, that's 20 years old. They've already been doing it, or they're at least 20 years into the project when they say, hey, we are going to finance A, B, and C, and in a few years we'll be doing this. Okay, we'll have this weapon, or we'll have this new spacecraft, or we'll have this, or we'll have that. And it's something that's absolutely, I have absolutely proven it over and over again, and it's almost exactly a 20-year kind of situation. And that brings us to, you had a question you had in mind about asking me something about Trump and the Space Force.
Yes, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the Space Force. It seems to be coming at an interesting time with all the changes occurring.
All right. Well, let me tell you this. I've been aware of the Space Force since 1999. Whoa. Say what? Anyhow, we have, and again, see, this is that 20-year thing I'm talking about, where Trump came out about 6-8 months ago, was now, where he came out and said, hey, we're thinking about having a new military force. We have Coast Guard, Air Force, Marines, the Army, and now we're going to have a Space Force.
Yeah.
And he came out, and he actually, when he introduced it, was at a graduation of some cadets, and he kind of was making fun of a little bit of the general that was sitting right there near him, and he said, I don't think the general even knows about this at all. And that, for the most part, is true. And I'm not going to get too far into this at this point, and I will explain that, because this is a part of what's in my brand new expose that I said's turned into such a giant project. But the Space Force has been functioning since the 1990s. And so it's not new at all, or not to me, although much of it's been classified above top secret, which includes spacecraft that go with, quote unquote, the Space Force. All right. Now, the only thing it's lacking, going back to 1990, when the very first of some of this associated equipment with Space Force was actually flying, already in the air, okay? And it's things that people generally don't know anything about. Although so much of it had been classified top secret for that period of time, going all the way back that far, that's why when Trump mentioned it, he said, I don't think the general, because I guess the general would give him a surprise look, like, what the hell is he talking about? the general did not know about it because it has been above their classification, classified above secret, above all, even a four-star major generals in charge of divisions of the Air Force did not know that this was a real thing that has literally been underway since 1990. And hopefully very soon I will be able to complete this giant project that I've been working on and get it out in everybody's hands, and you'll be able to see it. And it's gonna stop the clock. I'll tell you that much. It's the most
Definitely. We'll have to
amazing
have
project.
you back on after that.
Oh, without a doubt. And what I've accomplished in this, and again, I have to be kind of, I can't talk about it too much, and I don't want anybody trying to say, hey, can I, put in an advanced order or something? No, I won't do that. I'm getting pretty old in time here myself, and I'm in lousy physical condition ever since I was hit 6 months before they murdered Sonny. I was hit and blew my arm up, and so I've been in really lousy shape for the last actually 20 years. I hadn't even talked much about that, as a matter of fact, and I was hit in my bedroom, sound asleep in Los Angeles, California, 20 years ago, and a few months after I was hit, which literally blew my left arm apart, exploded it inside of my body, actually, so to speak. So I've had the loss of that and an unbelievable pain situation that I've been living with for 20 years. But it was only a few months later when, and at that time I was working with Sonny Bono, supplying him with unbelievable documentation, and he had just reached the point. This is documentation on a variety of outrageous criminal acts out of the presidency's office. And Sonny had finally reached a point where I received a call from Sonny at my house, and he said, be ready to come in 15 days when I come back from the Christmas holiday. About the 15th of December, I'll be back, and you have to come to Washington because I'm publicly opening the expose that you've been working with me for so long. And that was great. He said he also informed me at that time that they had the capability of subpoenas. So the people they were going to subpoena at the highest level of government were going to either show up or they were going to be put in jail until they decided to talk. It was a pretty heavy-duty thing. As a matter of fact, it would have been the biggest, most amazing congressional inquiry ever, probably. And they couldn't handle it. A couple days after I got the call, they murdered Sonny on the ski slopes. And so whatever. That was about 6 months after I was hit. And over the period of the 30 years that I've been doing this and being involved with, I even did work for Manuel Noriega, the dictator's lawyers. But I've been involved in many, many things that people never knew that I had been doing. And I'd had 3 attempts to take me out, to kill me over the period of 30 years. One was way back, right in the middle of the Iran-Contra stuff, when a guy drove through my wall, through a glass sliding door in Florida, and missed killing me by about 24 inches. Came completely through my wall, right into my desk, and the vehicle that he had driven, and it would have been an accident, of course. The vehicle he had driven stopped about 3 inches in front of my desk, and that was rather exciting. I also had been some type of a chemical dusting, possibly arsenic or some particular one of the two or three things I use. I had been dusted, which brought on a heart attack at that same time, and the other time was with, again, the same period of time in general during the Iran-Contra stuff. By the way, there was an awful lot of dead people during the Iran-Contra investigations because they were linking, which is part of what I was doing, but they were linking illegal drug smuggling right into the Contras. I mean, they shipped weapons down in Air Force aircraft, unloaded the weapons, and then loaded cocaine in the aircraft and flew it back right to our air bases, for crying out loud. And they were just marked as Central Intelligence aircraft. Nobody could even go near it, including the general that might have been in charge of it at that time, the in charge of the air base. He couldn't even go in and see what was going on, and they were offloading cocaine by the tons. And of course that was all involved with Clinton, also out of Arkansas, the biggest drug smuggling guy in the world, all doing the same thing. Just outrageous with the White House directly involved with the transportation of narcotics. And of course, when Clinton was a governor, was when that was going on, and it was Bush 1, so to speak, that was the president at the time. So it's completely holding hands, so to speak.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, I also want to make a real important point. Right now, the Trump, with all this problems and stuff, with all this gobbledygook that's going on with him, constant attacks and everything, what had taken place here, our enemy in the United States of America, while we are watching the transfer of this country from a legitimate, freedom-loving country to a dictatorial, I don't know the best way to even phrase it, but absolutely the same as Adolf Hitler. He called it, when he was taking over and doing his thing until he was stopped and run off to South America, Adolf Hitler called it the New World Order. All right? The third party in America that is attempting, and unfortunately they're doing very well, that are attempting to destroy what we have, the basic constitutional government that we've been functioning under for 200 years. The label is the New World Order. It's one world government. It is the very highest level of the elite wealthy who are globalists with the intent of having the United Nations, the only people that carry arms, to enforce the small numbers that have all the money. And it's the same New World Order concept that Hitler was involved with himself back that far. And even back then when Roosevelt himself, there's a huge marble memorial to Roosevelt, President Roosevelt. And it's all it's talking about, or what he's talking about is, matter of fact, this is a marble, huge edifice with a replica of him in his wheelchair to the right of it, and his dog, even the little Scotty used to own, in front of him. And on the plaque on that huge marble thing it says, people are a limited few have decided they want to have a new world order, and it is not new and it is not order, and something to the extent that this is a treasonous situation. And that's on a Roosevelt memorial, I think originally put up probably in about 1950. Kennedy knew about it. It's one of the things he said in the speech only 6 weeks before they blew his brains out.
Yep.
Was that they are there. I have discovered a movement to take over this country into what they call a New World Order. Now, if what they've done recently is very slickly changed the wordage. Nobody's talked about New World Order for about 4 years. It's kind of been dropped out of the general application of usage, and they're calling it the deep state. Well, it's not a deep state, nothing. I mean, these are New World Order, one world government proponents. Those are the people that are your enemy, period. They are the people that have caused all of the grief that's happening. And what had taken place when Trump just kind of like almost arbitrarily decided things are screwed up and I got to run for the presidency. He knew nothing about most of all of this stuff. You know, he's a genius at what he knew and what he was doing, obviously. And his father was a genius and taught him well in terms of expanding their personal wealth with real estate, I guess, for the most part. It's the only way to put that. And so he knew a lot of stuff, and he had dealt with an awful lot of butt brains and all of that, and dynamic people, and et cetera. But I don't think he ever had a handle on what he was about to step into when he decided I'm going to run for the presidency. And now he knows more, but he still doesn't have a good handle on it, I don't think. There's certain things that, and if people even resist it, they don't even want, they just don't believe it. But if you go back, if people can do this for themselves, you take the names of the presidents, the last 6 or 7 presidents and vice presidents, and the people that they've surrounded themselves with, and just put their name in, whatever it is. Let's say it's George W. Bush or George H. or whatever, all right, and just put his name, then put New World Order speech, and you will find out all of the people that have been full-time New World Order, one world government advocates, and you're going to be upset because it's going to be people that you represented, that you wanted to help, people that you voted for, people that you believed were good all-American heroes or whatever, and you're going to find out all of the people by just putting those names and words together. You look it up on Google, you're going to be shocked, and you're going to find out the real enemies. Now, what happened with the New World Order movement, which literally I've been talking about myself personally, along with so many people in what we call the Patriot movement for so long. I have been talking about it for 30 years once I discovered and realized what the hell it was. Now, this is not conspiracy theory. This is the biggest conspiracy ongoing for 75 years, if not more. And it's been the progressive manner by which you can change this, change that, little by little, et cetera, and put us into this parliamentary, globalist kind of a structure, kind of like I say, sort of quasi-parliamentary, with the only people having physical weapons will be the enforcers, and that's under the banner of the United Nations, which means all the removal of weapons, nobody can have any weapons. So it would look like Venezuela. We're watching that today on the news every day the last couple of days. The only weapons those folks have were rocks. That's all they had until in the next couple of weeks, when we will unfortunately end up sending troops with weapons down there ourselves and supply weapons. They've already shipped a lot of that down there that nobody knows about. But anyhow, the only thing that happened that screwed them up, they were doing pretty good with changing and altering the structure of our judiciary and all of this crap, and these little tiny, very well thought out moves. And they had done really well and fully anticipated that a super New World Order advocate called Hillary Clinton was absolutely going to win it and take it, and continue what Obama who was a New World Order guy, and the Bush families were all New World Order people, and they were just going to wrap this thing up and put icing on the cake as of last November, or a year and a half ago, November. And all of a sudden, up pops this guy that doesn't even have a good handle on it, but you know, excuse me, Donald Trump, that just kind of popped up, and I'm going to run for presidency. Holy mackerel! And of course, they laughed. They because they were paying off people. They had certain areas where they had completely rigged voting booths and all that, where they knew that she was supposed to get it all. And lo and behold, he won. And that threw them in a loop. So now they're doing this, what I refer to just extraordinarily goofy, off the wall stuff that they're doing in terms of trying to reverse this thing. Oh my God! All of a sudden, he set them back 10 years. Just pop it in there. And as a matter of fact, talking about rigging the polling booths, particularly the electronic polling booths. When I ran in 1990, I ran against Bill McCollum in the state of Florida, where I was living at the time. I ran against him in the United States Congress. I was a candidate for Congress. I ran as a Democrat because he was a Republican. So that was the only situation there. And again, from my side of it, I know better because I have a complete understanding of this thing. And Republican, Democrat doesn't have a damn thing to do with anything. The bottom line is, you know, are you a world government proponent, or are you still a believer in the Constitution of America? But anyhow, I didn't have any money. I had no money, no funding, no anything, and very little name recognition. But I came very close to taking Bill McCollum out down there in 1990 for the Orlando area the congressional representative. And I shook him up, that was for sure. But Bill McCollum had been directly involved with recruiting mercenaries in the Iran-Contra Nicaragua situation. And on the left hand, and on the right hand was actually sitting and directly involved with, supposedly, with the investigations of the Iran-Contra stuff. And he was, in fact, himself totally involved with it, and I was aware of it, and made that aware down there when I ran. That's why I did so well. But to get back to the potential of rigged polling booths, I was doing work actually at that time with supplying information to Senator John Kerry. Now, again, bear in mind, I've done reports and work and added to several major investigations, and they were both left and right. In other words, it's Democrats and Republicans. And what was funny that I discovered with that was that typically, if it was a Democrat pursuing something, and I would get a phone call and somebody say, "Mr. Fletcher, do you have anything about this and this, or connect this person to that, or this problem with that?" And if I did, I would say, "Well, yeah, sure I do, as a matter of fact." And lo and behold, I would be doing something for somebody on the Democratic Party, or the next phone call I get might be somebody in the Republican Party. And all of these guys, of course, thought they were taking advantage of this jerk in Florida that used to own a toy company. And it ended up almost every time that the information I end up giving them, whomever they were, was literally classified secret after I delivered it to them. In other words, my stuff was so good on all of these inquiries, and like I said, they all kind of, I think, giggled originally, thought, "Oh, gee, we got this guy, he's going to give us this, and we can use that against this and against that and everything." And it was both the left and the right. But anyhow, I had been, when I ran for the Congress down there against Bill McCollum, Senator Kerry called me and said, after I came out, and it was like within 9 percentage points of taking him. And Senator Kerry said, you know, you probably won that election down there. And I said, well, you know, what do you mean? And he said, well, we know that several, particularly in that county there, that where you were, et cetera, that the machines are set to kick over every fourth or fifth vote to the other column. It was electronically pre-programmed to do that. And he said that constitutes like about 20% and of stolen from the left to the right or the right to the left. And he said, so you may actually have won that, and you know no way to know about it unless you had $1 million to chase it. Now that was literally Senator Kerry's people. And then also I remember I got a kick out of it. He said that was really amazing because he knew I didn't have any money or anything. He said, what would you have done if you had won and had taken over the congressional seat? And I said, well, for one thing, I would be a real pain in the ASS and up there. And one of the greatest things I'd ever heard from anybody out of Washington was, he said, I got news, Bob. You are already considered to be that up here in Washington. So I said, oh, okay. Well, then I've accomplished something.
Wow.
And I wanted to. So anyhow, I really like people. If you don't really have a handle on the world order, this new world order thing, you got to really look it up. And like I said, run the names of different people. Anybody you want to know about, just put, the guy's name, John Kerry or whoever the heck, just Senator John Kerry, and you put New World Order proponent or New World Order speech. That's the best way to do it, and you'll find out when they were making some kind of a speech relative to it.
Right.
I want to say something that, if we have time. Do you have another question? You had something else you wanted to ask?
Well, we're about out of time. If
okay.
there's anything else you'd like to add before we close out, go ahead.
No, okay. Well, I'll tell you one thing. If people that grab up a pencil and paper, if you want to write to me directly, as a matter of fact, I have my website that you've seen already on this program here, but which is bobfletcherinvestigations.com. The only thing I have on there are the direct investigations that I have done. If you want to write to me, as a matter of fact, I'll say, if you have the opportunity, go on my website. If you're not involved with that, you want to write me directly. It's a post office box 216, Bayview, Idaho 83803. That's box 216, Bayview, Idaho 83803. If you're interested in the Nibiru DVD, which by the way, it's a double disc, it's 2 discs. It's $24.95, and I pay for the shipping for it. And it's a double disc. It's really important. It's got photographs and footage you've never seen in your life, and an explanation of Planet X and the potentials of Planet X. You'll be amazed if you don't know too much about it. And again, it totally explains how I got into that, et cetera, and how I ended up being involved with that thing. So anyhow, and just keep an eye out for. Hopefully, I can finish what I've been working on for so long.
And once you're done with that, we'll definitely have to have you back on to talk all about that.
Oh well, and it's going to be history. It's going to be historic. That's how profuse it and how good it is. It's not that I shouldn't say good, but it is. But the point is, it's just stuff that people never knew, and I answer questions that have been floating around for quite a few years, and it's amazing. I wanted to make one brief statement because I'm talking about this. I saw the other day, I found I've, again, been doing this for so long. In 1990, there was a story done in Newsweek magazine. I think that's what it was, if I remember correctly. Oh, here we go. Yeah, hold on a second. I'm looking at this. It's a U.S. News and World Report magazine. And at the end of the year, in 1999, going into the year 2000, and it's a story, big picture story, and all that stuff, and was talking about a big story was written about me relative to my thoughts about what was coming up in the year 2000. And I said, I am positive that we're going to have a huge attack on the country, and it's going to be blamed on Osama bin Laden. And I said also at that time that they will blame it on him. It'll appear that he did it, and that they will also try to connect the Patriot movement at that time. But the only thing I was wrong about was the type of an attack. I was positive from information I was getting that the attack, which would have been in the next year or so, which of course was 9/11, but that the attack, I thought it was going to be 4 or 5 locations of a chemical biological spread in the air, like at a big football game or something of that sort. And but that's was printed in the U.S. News World Report, and unfortunately, I was right on. It was just a slight change of what they were planning to do, and it ended up being a different attack. But I actually named Osama bin Laden in the write-up. And another story that, again, I hadn't paid attention to at all. I had done, when I was doing so many of my my live presentations around the country, and back in, maybe I don't have the date on this darn thing. I don't, but it was about in the 1996, 97 period of time. And it's got a picture of myself, and it just simply said, it was up here in the Northwest someplace. And I had, the headline was, "We can't stop it." And what I was referring to and what the story was about is, in fact, the New World Order, the one world government. And that was in 96, 7, whatever it was, wow. That period of time. And I was already telling people that the world order, one world government, was in fact too far gone and that we couldn't stop it. I felt bad about that, but I was sure at that time that that was a condition. And I was right. So, you know, these jerks, you know, and I'll end up with this, Khrushchev, the premier of Russia, many years ago, I think like we're talking maybe in the 60s, at the United Nations, took off his shoe. This guy's a real whack. Took off his shoe and he was banging on the desk at the United Nations, and he was saying, "We will take over America without firing a shot." And that's spooky talk when I see socialism and communism introduced all over the highest levels of our government today. And that's very spooky stuff. Pay attention, people. This is not a joke, and it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a damn conspiracy. So thanks a lot for having me on.
Very well said. And I want to thank you so much for coming on, Bob. We're going to have you on again soon.
Absolutely. And like I say, I got to get under my belt a little more. I literally have worked 2 years on this project, actually longer than that, but 2 years, 6 days a week. And the amount of information that my people have fed to me, and the documentation, proof, films, and all the rest of that that's involved with this thing is just amazing.
Very good. Well, we'll be looking forward to that. And you have an excellent night.
Hey, same to you. Good night. Take care, and God bless everybody.
All right. Good night.